as I always like to say, and people are asking me to quit reminding them, but in Texas, where I grew up, the best way of convincing somebody that you mean business is to simply show them your gun with your back turned to everybody else. Just show them your gun and just say, I know how to use this and I'm prepared to. You really want to push me to this? It's fine. I'll accommodate you. That's Texas. And unfortunately, fortunately, this is something that bully boys tend to understand. And one reason why, and this may lead to our next issue of what's the tragedy that just happened in Gaza to our army. This is why I wanted to make sure that whenever anybody in the Arab world thought of Gaza, all they would think in their head was rubble from one end to the other. And that rubble was produced by a Jewish army. We all remember with Hafez al-Assad in Syria, what's called Hama Rules. Hama was a city that went into revolt against the current Bashir Assad's father,
yes,
who was a brute of a man. And what he did was he said, okay, the city's revolted. He ringed the city with artillery, tanks, bombed it from the air for about a week, 2 weeks. He killed an estimated 30,000 people. It was probably far more than that.
And the city was reduced to rubble.
And this was called Hama Rules, which was a metaphor for the Arab approach to dealing with problems. So we need a Jewish equivalent of that. And that may be Gaza rules, where when people even get the thought of hurting us, they'll stop, because the first thing that will come into their mind is the rubble of Gaza. Now, what just happened? 21 of our finest, but there are 21 of our finest got killed in an explosion while they were preparing one or possibly two buildings for demolition. I've said from the start, I said it 3 years ago, the last thing in the world that we should be engaged in is urban warfare. This is a fool's errand. 3 years ago, I coined the term Stalingrad on the Mediterranean. And this is exactly what's happened right now because of the stupidity and indifference of our high command to the casualties of our soldiers. Stupidity. The whole point was, let's go back to October 7th. What's come out now are the following facts. There was no war plan to go into Gaza. Now, I could have told you that 3 years ago when I was ridiculed for talking about a scenario that would never happen. That was their attitude. Why am I wasting my breath on something that would never happen? And I shot back, say never say never. They thought that was funny. Second of all, many of the soldiers had to be trained, despite the fact that we have kind of an urban village down in Selim, down south. That was like for an Arab village, not a city. We had no idea. The army didn't know what in the world to do at this point. So they had to start retraining. The third thing was inadequate resources. We all know how everybody had to go out, or a lot of people, myself included, had to go out and buy essential things for the army, like ceramic plates, gloves,
yes,
hollow sides.
I myself was engaged. I must
right, even
food.
Even food. The army was completely. This is going to be a whole section of the commission of inquiry, hopefully.
If and when we get to that commission. And then of course the major only real question is who decides who will be on that commission.
Yeah, well, that's the other major. Right now we have the one guy. I don't want to mention his name and get in trouble, but I mean, I don't trust any of these people at all. None of them, because they're all part of the deep state, all of them. And they will all shade the truth, and they'll all manipulate the commission to the point where you won't know who's, like Machon, who's responsible, who's accountable. Well, not me. It was his fault. And it'll all be pointing fingers until they'll, hopefully, in their mind, get over this problem and people will forget. So let me get back to Gaza.
By the way, Jonathan, what if you're able to mention, what are your sources for the things you just pointed out about lack of readiness and what have you?
I have a lot of friends, of a lot of very well-placed, a lot of very well-placed friends.
Enough said.
No, who have been suppressed, discriminated against, ridiculed, no differently than all those female soldiers who quite professionally and valiantly tried to bring to the attention of their betters, supposedly, the fact that war was coming.
Yes.
And they were, as I said, threatened even.
Some of them were reprimanded and even threatened with court-martial. Yes, I know this.
Correct. And these are friends of mine in much higher positions that have learned to look, watch, listen, and draw the appropriate conclusions, and realize that perhaps because of the kippah on their heads, they will never advance past Tataluf, if that. And I know that they've been trying to get the word out for I know from 3 years ago, they've been trying to get the word out. And I will mention General Brick in just a minute, because we mentioned him before. So most of us that were involved with talking about Gaza, a Gaza scenario, absolutely, we almost threatened to go public with our concerns over the possibility of an urban warfare campaign. I thought it was just a possibility. I had no idea at the time the high command would be foolhardy enough and callous enough to actually implement one. So you have these soldiers collecting munitions, landmines, and whatever else to blow up these buildings. You have to understand, this is in the middle of a war zone. It wasn't a pacified area. There were rocket-propelled grenades going off all over the place, heavy machine guns, sniper fires, everything. It was a war zone. I'm sorry, but you don't put this kind of explosive power in any building in the middle of a war zone. If you want to take out a building, or buildings, in this case, two, this is why God created 2,000-pound aerial bombs. It's very simple. And under normal circumstances, these wonderful Hayalim would have stood back, let the Air Force drop 1 or 2 bombs, and move on to the next target. But because of the Americans and because of the traitors in our army and our government, the highest level in the war cabinet that have capitulated to the United States, we would rather, as I put it, trade bodies for bombs. So we send these guys in, these wonderful men, we send them into buildings that are under fire at the time with tons of high explosives. And, well, this is what you get. It's in the middle of a war. 21 men, the blood of 21 men. I'm not going to put it on the Americans alone. I'm going to put it squarely where it belongs. Halevi and the war cabinet. Gantz, Eisenkot, Gallant, and Netanyahu. The blood of those men are on their hands. And we should never forget that or forgive it. So instead of doing what many of us were suggesting 3 years ago, to develop certain weapons, conventional weapons, that would take out the situation, right now, more people are listening to me. I don't know, half seriously or whether they're just kind of letting me vent. I would much rather use a nuclear demolition. Dig a hole 800 meters down, drop the bomb at the bottom, fill it up with concrete and detonate it, and drop Khan Yunis into the ground, maybe almost 1,000 meters into the ground, and leave a crater perhaps 1 kilometer wide. I wouldn't mind that at all. To save one soldier, I wouldn't mind that at all. So people say, well, what about the hostages? Well, what about them? They are now weapons being used by Hamas. I'm sorry to say that, but that's what they are. And their backers here, the various leftist organizations, and the so-called families are doing Hamas's work. Tali Gottlieb mentioned this fact, and she's right. And so whenever I see the press and the deep state and the left dumping on somebody like her, I figure she's touched a raw nerve. And with the Mossad now lying about what the leader, this female leader of the Kaplan Brigade, has done with the Americans and with Hamas. They are lying, point blank, lying.
Perhaps you could elaborate on what you just alluded to.
There is a story going around that this particular individual, has been talking to Hamas and has been talking to other countries about how to operationalize the hostage situation as a weapon, basically, against Bibi. And the Mossad.
That's because these people continue to view Netanyahu and his coalition government as a much more serious enemy than Hamas.
Correct. I heard a woman screaming on Gaza today. One woman with a bullhorn closed the whole street. One of these leftists screaming, "We have to bring the hostages back and get rid of Bibi." That was in the same sentence.
Where was this?
On Gaza Street. She had a big bullhorn.
That's very appropriate. Rehov Azza.
Yeah, okay, you just stopped me from going on. I'll leave it. I'll let you give you the kudos on that one. Yeah, I thought it was very ironic. Very ironic. Here she is on Rehov Azza screaming this stuff out. Okay, fine. Thank you for being an ally of Hamas.
This might be a good point to remind ourselves and everybody else that Azza, known in English as Gaza, and perhaps I'll explain in a moment why it's known as Gaza and not Azza, because that was an area inhabited by Jews for the past 3,000 years.
Exactly.
Until very recent times when the Arabs rose up and in a huge pogrom slaughtered all the Jews that were there.
They made it
Gaza City. Exactly. And that is why there is a street called Rehov Azza, Gaza Street, in near downtown Jerusalem, because it is a Jewish area. It's not some foreign territory.
Not at all. And I would just like to point out something, and I want people to understand how they have to kind of read between the lines on this. It's extraordinary where the Mossad feels compelled to issue a blanket denial of a story that blackens the reputation of a hard leftist. Now, why would that be? Who asked the Mossad to open up their corrupt mouth at this point? Who did? Who benefits? The Mossad didn't have to open up their mouths. Nobody asked them to say anything on behalf of Shikma Bessler. Nothing. They should have kept their mouths shut. But just like during the anti-judicial reform program that the left ran, the head of the Mossad, the current head of the Mossad, thought it was okay if members of the organization went out and protested. Do you have any idea what should have happened to him and those members in any rational, normal, professional intelligence operation? They should have been gone that day. Well, here now, they've come up, they've broadcast this statement that, as far as they're concerned, no such chicanery has been done by this wonderful patriotic woman. Really? And you want us to believe that? If I had any doubts about the credibility of these stories going around, they were laid to rest by what the Mossad just did. This is the deep state, Rabbi. This is an example of the deep state.
You took the words out of my mouth. I was about to say that one has to be particularly ignorant and unaware
Dense.
of realities in the past and the present, not to have a very negative opinion of the Israeli deep state, which in fact
No.
is not very much better than the American deep state.